The sun, a malevolent eye in the vast, unforgiving sky, glared down upon Redemption, Arizona with the intensity of a blacksmith's forge. The year was 1888, and the town, a speck of precarious civilization clinging to the edge of the vast Sonoran desert, was wilting under the oppressive heat. Dust devils, miniature tornadoes of swirling sand and grit, danced across the parched landscape, mimicking the restless spirits of the men and women who had come to this harsh land seeking fortune, freedom, or escape. The wooden buildings, bleached bone-white by the relentless sun, seemed to huddle together for protection, their false fronts and dusty windows offering little respite from the pervasive heat. The air hung heavy and still, thick with the scent of sun-baked earth, creosote bushes, and the faint, ever-present aroma of horse manure. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional lazy buzz of a horsefly, the distant clang of a hammer from the blacksmith's shop now sadly vacant, and the rhythmic creak of a windmill desperately trying to coax water from the reluctant earth. It was the kind of quiet that pressed down on you, a silence that whispered of hardship, resilience, and the constant, underlying threat of the unforgiving wilderness. At the edge of town, nestled amongst a scattering of cottonwood trees that offered a meager shade, stood a small, unassuming house. It was a simple structure built of whitewashed adobe brick with a pitched roof of weathered wooden shingles. A small, meticulously tended garden bloomed defiantly in front, a riot of color against the drab backdrop of the desert. Bright red geraniums, cheerful yellow sunflowers, and fragrant lavender bushes struggled to survive, their vibrant hues a testament to the care and dedication of their owner. A white picket fence, more for show than security, enclosed the property, adding a touch of quaint charm to the otherwise austere dwelling. Inside the house, Alara Bellwether moved with the quiet grace of a woman who had found peace in the simple rhythms of domestic life. She was humming a tuneless melody, a half-forgotten lullaby from her childhood as her hands, weathered but still strong, worked a ball of dough on a flowered wooden table. The kitchen, the heart of her small home, was filled with the comforting aroma of baking bread, a scent that spoke of warmth, nourishment, and a semblance of normalcy in a world often defined by chaos. Alara was a woman of indeterminate age, her face a tapestry of time and experience. Her hair, once the color of raven's wings, was now streaked with silver, pulled back from her face in a tight, practical bun. Fine lines, etched by sun and wind and worry, radiated from the corners of her eyes, eyes that were a startling shade of blue, the color of a desert sky just after dawn. They were eyes that held a depth of knowledge, a quiet intensity that hinted at a past far removed from the peaceful tranquility of her present life. She wore a simple faded cotton dress, covered by a well-worn apron, its pockets filled with the tools of her domestic trade, a small knife, a wooden spoon, a packet of seeds. She was to all outward appearances the epitome of a quiet, unassuming widow. The townsfolk of Redemption saw her as a gentle, somewhat melancholy figure, deserving of their pity and their occasional acts of kindness. They knew she had lost her husband, Thomas, the town's blacksmith, to a swift and merciless fever 5 years prior. They saw her tend her garden, sell her baked goods at the weekly market, attend church services with a quiet, respectful demeanor. They offered her condolences, a helping hand with chores, a shared meal on holidays. They saw her loneliness, her quiet strength, her resilience. But they saw only the surface, the carefully constructed facade that Alara had painstakingly built around herself, brick by brick, lie by lie, year after year. They had no inkling of the woman who lurked beneath the surface, the woman who had once been known only as Whisper. The name itself was a legend, a chilling whisper that echoed through the saloons and gambling dens of the Wild West. Whisper, the deadliest gunslinger in the territory, a phantom, a wraith, a bringer of death. Stories about her exploits, often embellished and exaggerated, were traded like currency amongst outlaws, lawmen, and bounty hunters. Some said she could shoot the pips off a playing card at 100 yards. Others claimed she could draw and fire her twin Colt peacemakers faster than the eye could follow. Still others whispered that she had killed more men than any other gunslinger, male or female, in the history of the West. The truth, as always, was more complex, more nuanced, and far more compelling. Alara, born Alara McAllister on a small, struggling farm in the hills of Kentucky, had not been raised to be a killer. Her early life had been one of hardship, poverty, and the constant struggle for survival. She had learned to shoot as a child, not for sport or glory, but out of necessity, to protect her family's meager livestock from predators, both animal and human. She had a natural talent for it, an uncanny ability to aim and fire with deadly accuracy, a gift that both frightened and fascinated her. Her life had changed forever when she was 16. A band of ruthless outlaws, led by a sadistic man named Bloody Ben Thompson, no relation to the famous lawman, had raided her family's farm looking for food, horses, and anything else of value. They had killed her parents brutally and without mercy, and had left her for dead, a traumatized witness to their unspeakable cruelty. But Alara had survived. Driven by grief, rage, and a burning desire for revenge, she had tracked the outlaws across the unforgiving landscape, honing her skills, learning to live off the land, transforming herself from a frightened farm girl into a cold, calculating instrument of vengeance. She had adopted the name Whisper, not because she was quiet, but because her bullets spoke for her, delivering their deadly message with swift, silent precision. Her pursuit of Bloody Ben and his gang had become a legend in its own right. She had moved like a ghost through the shadows, leaving a trail of dead outlaws in her wake. She had become a master of disguise, a chameleon who could blend into any environment, any social setting. She had learned to use not only her guns but also her wits, her cunning, and her knowledge of human nature to outsmart her enemies. She was in essence a force of nature, a whirlwind of vengeance that swept across the West, leaving behind a trail of blood and broken dreams. She had finally caught up with Bloody Ben in a dusty, forgotten town in New Mexico. Their final confrontation, a showdown in the middle of the street, had been brief and brutal. Ilara, her face a mask of cold fury, had outdrawn and outshot the notorious outlaw, ending his reign of terror with a single well-aimed bullet. But the victory had been hollow. The death of Bloody Ben had not brought back her parents, had not erased the trauma she had endured. It had, however, left her with a reputation, a notoriety that she could not escape. She had become Whisper, the legend, the myth, the feared gunslinger. For years, she had drifted across the West, taking on odd jobs, bounty hunting, working as a security guard for stagecoach lines and mining companies. She had lived by her guns, her skills always in demand in a land where violence was a constant companion. She had seen the best and worst of humanity, the greed, the cruelty, the desperation, but also the courage, the resilience, and the occasional flicker of kindness. She had met Thomas Bellwether in a small mining town in Colorado. He was a gentle giant, a man of quiet strength and unwavering kindness, a man who saw past the legend of Whisper and saw the wounded, vulnerable woman beneath. He had offered her a different life, a life of peace, of love, of normalcy. He had offered her a chance to escape the shadow of her past. She had taken that chance, embracing it with a desperate hope that she could finally find the redemption she craved. She had buried her guns, literally and figuratively, burying them deep beneath the floorboards of their small house, burying the memories, the trauma, the violence deep within her soul. She had become Ilara Bellwether, the blacksmith's wife, the quiet widow, the unassuming member of a small, ordinary community. And for 5 years it had worked. She had found a measure of peace, a semblance of happiness. She had learned to love the simple routines of domestic life, the satisfaction of tending her garden, the warmth of human connection. She had almost convinced herself that she could leave the past behind, that she could escape the ghost of Whisper. But the past, like a persistent bloodstain, could never be fully erased. The arrival of Razor Riggs and his gang was a stark reminder of that fact. As she hung her laundry on the line, oblivious to the approaching danger, Ilara was a picture of serene domesticity. But within her, deep beneath the calm surface, the embers of Whisper still glowed, dormant but not extinguished. The instincts, the skills, the reflexes honed over years of violence were still there, buried but not forgotten. The three bandits approached her house, their boots crunching on the gravel path, their voices harsh and guttural. Razor, the leader, was a man who exuded cruelty. His face, scarred and weathered, was framed by greasy black hair that hung to his shoulders. His eyes, cold and calculating, were the eyes of a predator, always searching for weakness, for opportunity. He wore a stained leather vest over a dirty shirt, a pair of worn-out jeans, and scuffed boots. A large Bowie knife was strapped to his hip, and a Colt Peacemaker revolver hung low on his thigh, its handle worn smooth from years of use. Fitch, the weasel-faced one, was his opposite in many ways. He was small and wiry, with a nervous energy that made him seem constantly on edge. His eyes darted around nervously, taking in every detail, always looking for an escape route, a way to avoid direct confrontation. He was a coward, a sneak, a man who preferred to strike from the shadows. He carried a smaller pistol tucked into his waistband and a wicked-looking skinning knife sheathed on his belt. Ox the Brute was a simple creature, a mountain of muscle and stupidity. He was slow-witted and easily led. His only real value to Razor was his brute strength and his unquestioning loyalty. He carried a shotgun, its barrels sawed off to make it even more menacing, and a heavy club studded with nails. They stopped a few feet from Ilara, their shadows falling across her like a dark omen. Razor smirked, enjoying the moment, the anticipation of the fear he was about to inflict. "Well, well, well," he said, his voice a gravelly drawl. "What have we here? A lonely little widow woman all by herself." Ilara continued to hang her laundry, her back to them, seemingly oblivious to their presence. She was acutely aware of them, of course. She had felt their approach long before they had reached her house, her senses, honed by years of living on the edge, picking up the subtle vibrations in the earth, the change in the air pressure, the sudden silence of the birds. She took a deep breath, calming her racing heart, steeling her nerves. She had hoped this day would never come, but she had always known deep down that it was inevitable. The past had a way of finding you, no matter how far you ran, no matter how well you hid. "I help you, gentlemen?" she asked, her voice calm and even, betraying none of the turmoil that was churning within her. She slowly turned to face them, her hands still holding a damp sheet, her eyes meeting Razor's with a steady, unwavering gaze. It was the gaze of a woman who had seen death, who had dealt death, and who was not afraid to do so again. It was the gaze of Whisper, the legendary gunslinger, and it was a gaze that should have sent chills down the spines of even the most hardened outlaws. But Razor, blinded by his arrogance and his underestimation of his prey, saw only a frail, defenseless widow. He saw an easy target, he saw a victim. He was in that moment the most dangerous kind of fool, a confident one, and that was a mistake that was going to change their lives. Razor's smirk widened, revealing a row of stained and crooked teeth. He took a step closer, invading Alara's personal space, his foul breath washing over her. She didn't flinch, didn't back away. She simply held his gaze, her blue eyes unwavering, like twin pools of ice reflecting the harsh desert sun. This unexpected stillness, this lack of fear unnerved Fitch, who shifted nervously from foot to foot, his hand instinctively moving towards the pistol tucked into his waistband. Ox, however, remained oblivious, his dull eyes fixed on Alara with a mixture of curiosity and dim-witted lust. "We're here on official business," Razor said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He glanced at Fitch and Ox, a silent command for them to spread out to flank Alara to cut off any potential escape routes. They obeyed instantly, their movements practiced and predatory. They were wolves circling their prey, confident in their numbers, their strength, their ability to overwhelm. "Official business?" Alara asked, her voice still calm, but with a subtle edge, a hint of steel beneath the velvet. She carefully folded the damp sheet she was holding, her movements deliberate and unhurried, as if she had all the time in the world. This deliberate slowness, this utter lack of panic, further irritated Razor. He was used to fear, to cowering pleas for mercy, to the desperate scrambling of victims trying to escape. This quiet defiance was unsettling, a fly in the ointment of his carefully laid plan. "Yeah," Razor continued, his voice hardening. "We're collecting donations for the Widows and Orphans Fund." He chuckled, a harsh, grating sound that lacked any genuine humor. Fitch snickered, a high-pitched, nervous giggle. Ox simply grunted, his small brain struggling to keep up with the conversation. Alara raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, a silent question that spoke volumes. She knew exactly what kind of donations these men were after. She had seen their type before countless times in her former life. They were vultures preying on the weak, the vulnerable, the seemingly defenseless. They were the reason she had become Whisper. "I'm afraid I don't have much to donate," Alara said, her voice still calm and measured. She placed the folded sheet in a wicker basket at her feet, her movements slow and deliberate. "My husband, he didn't leave me much." Razor's eyes narrowed. He didn't like being challenged, even subtly. He didn't like this woman's composure, her lack of fear. He decided to escalate, to break her, to make her beg. "We ain't asking for much, old woman," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "Just a little something to show your appreciation for our protection." He reached out and grabbed her arm, his grip tight and painful. Alara didn't react outwardly. She didn't cry out, didn't struggle, but within her a transformation was taking place. The embers of Whisper, dormant for so long, were being fanned into flames. The memories, the skills, the instincts honed over years of violence and survival were flooding back, sharpening her senses, focusing her mind. She was no longer Alara Bellwether, the quiet widow. She was Whisper, the gunslinger, and she was about to unleash hell upon these unsuspecting fools. She felt the roughness of Razor's calloused hand on her arm, the pressure of his grip, the underlying threat of violence. She felt a surge of adrenaline, a cold, calculating rage that washed away any lingering fear or hesitation. She analyzed the situation with lightning speed, assessing the threat level of each man, calculating angles, distances, reaction times. Razor was the immediate threat, his grip on her arm a physical manifestation of his dominance. Fitch was the most nervous, the weakest link, the one most likely to panic. Ox was the brute, slow and predictable, but dangerous because of his sheer size and strength. She had no weapons visible, but she was far from unarmed. She had the element of surprise, the advantage of their underestimation. She had her skills, her training, her experience. And she had the will to survive, the burning desire to protect her home, her peace, her carefully constructed life. "I don't need your protection," Alara said, her voice still calm, but now laced with a chilling steeliness that sent a shiver down Fitch's spine. He instinctively took a step back, his hand tightening on the grip of his pistol. Razor, however, was too blinded by his own arrogance to notice the subtle shift in Alara's demeanor. He squeezed her arm harder, his fingers digging into her flesh. "You don't get to decide that, old woman," he snarled. "We decide, and we decide you need protecting. Now be a good little widow and show us where you keep your valuables." Alara looked at him, her blue eyes burning with a cold fire. She saw the cruelty, the greed, the utter lack of humanity in his gaze. She saw the reflection of bloody Ben Thompson, of countless other men like him, men who had preyed on the innocent, who had reveled in violence and destruction. And she knew with absolute certainty that she would not allow them to win. "I have nothing of value," she said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. It was the voice of Whisper, the voice that had struck terror into the hearts of countless outlaws. It was a voice that promised death. Razor laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Don't play coy with me, old woman. Everyone's got something to hide. Now where is it? The money, the jewelry, the silver, anything you got." He gave her arm another, more forceful squeeze as warning. He started to pull her along, but surprisingly she did not move. She resisted. She locked eyes with the bandit, a stare down. "I told you," Alara said, her voice still a whisper but now laced with an unmistakable threat. "I have nothing of value to you." The emphasis on the last two words was subtle but significant. It was a challenge, a gauntlet thrown down. It was a declaration of war. Fitch, sensing the shift in the dynamic, drew his pistol, his hand shaking slightly. "Don't make this difficult, old woman," he stammered, his voice cracking with nervousness. "We don't want to hurt you, much." Ox, sensing the tension, lumbered forward, cracking his knuckles, a dull, thudding sound that echoed in the quiet afternoon. He grinned, a slow, stupid grin that revealed a mouthful of broken and missing teeth. Razor, still holding Alara's arm, felt a flicker of unease. He had faced down dozens of men, hardened killers, desperate outlaws. He had never felt this kind of resistance from a victim before. There was something in this woman's eyes, something cold and deadly, that made him hesitate just for a moment. It was a flicker of doubt, a premonition of danger. But it was too late. The trap had been sprung, the game had begun, and Alara, the quiet widow, was about to unleash the fury of Whisper upon them. The seemingly ordinary afternoon in Redemption was about to explode into violence, a violence that would forever shatter the town's illusion of peace and reveal the hidden truth beneath its placid surface. The hawk circling overhead screeched again, a sharp, piercing cry that seemed to herald the coming storm. The wind, which had been still for hours, suddenly picked up, swirling dust around the feet of the combatants, creating a miniature whirlwind that mirrored the turmoil to come. The laundry on the clothesline flapped wildly like the wings of a trapped bird, a silent witness to the impending showdown. Alara, her eyes locked on Razor's, felt a strange sense of calm, a cold, detached focus that always descended upon her in moments of extreme danger. It was the calm of a predator, the calm of a woman who knew exactly what she was capable of and who was about to unleash it. The calm before the storm was now over. The air crackled with unspoken tension, a silent battle of wills between the hardened outlaw and the seemingly defenseless widow. Razor's grip on Alara's arm tightened, his fingers digging into her flesh like cruel talons. He leaned in closer, his fetid breath hot on her face, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and a dawning, unsettling realization that he might have miscalculated. "I'm losing my patience, old woman," he growled, his voice a low, guttural threat. "Tell us where the valuables are or things are gonna get real ugly." Alara didn't respond immediately. She simply held his gaze, her blue eyes unwavering, unblinking like chips of glacial ice. It was a gaze that had stared down death countless times, a gaze that had seen the darkest depths of human depravity, a gaze that had witnessed horrors that would make even the most hardened outlaw blanch. It was the gaze of a predator, not prey. It was the gaze of Whisper. Slowly, deliberately, Alara raised her free hand, the one that had been holding the folded sheet. She held it up, palm open between them, a gesture that seemed almost peaceful. Razor frowned, confused by this unexpected move. He had expected resistance, pleading, perhaps even a desperate attempt to flee, but this quiet defiance, this calm in the face of overwhelming odds, was unnerving. "I told you," Alara said, her voice still a low whisper but now carrying a weight, a resonance that seemed to fill the air around them. "I have nothing of value to you." And then, with a speed that defied belief, a speed that belied her age and seemingly frail physique, she moved. It wasn't a large movement, not a dramatic flourish. It was a subtle shift of weight, a slight twist of her body, a flick of her wrist. But in that fraction of a second, the folded sheet in her hand unfolded, revealing not linen but gleaming, cold steel. It was a Colt Peacemaker, one of her infamous pair, hidden within the folds of the seemingly innocuous laundry. She had practiced this move countless times, perfecting it over years of deadly encounters until it had become second nature, an instinctive response to danger. The draw was so fast, so seamless that it was almost invisible to the naked eye. One moment she was a helpless widow. The next she was a deadly gunslinger, her weapon leveled at Razor's chest. The transformation was shocking, breathtaking, terrifying. The air, already thick with tension, seemed to solidify, to freeze in time. Razor's eyes widened in disbelief, his smirk fading into a mask of stunned surprise. Fitch gasped, stumbling backward, his own pistol still half drawn. Ox, his slow mind struggling to process what was happening, simply blinked, his mouth agape. The click of the hammer being cocked was the only sound in the sudden silence, a sharp, metallic sound that echoed like a thunderclap in the quiet afternoon. It was the sound of death, the sound of judgment, the sound of Whisper's return. "Drop your weapons," Alara said, her voice still a whisper but now amplified by the deadly weapon in her hand. It was a voice that carried the weight of authority, the weight of experience, the weight of countless lives taken. It was a voice that brooked no argument. Razor, his mind reeling, his body frozen in shock, instinctively tightened his grip on Alara's arm. It was a mistake. Before he could even register the pain, before he could even think of reacting, Alara moved again. With a speed that seemed almost supernatural, she twisted her arm, breaking his grip with ease. She then brought the barrel of her Colt up, smashing it against his temple with brutal force. The blow connected with a sickening thud. Razor's eyes rolled back in his head, and he crumpled to the ground like a sack of potatoes, unconscious before he even hit the dust. Alara didn't waste a second. She pivoted, her gun now leveled at Fitch, who was still fumbling with his own weapon. He froze, his eyes wide with terror, his hands shaking so violently that he could barely hold his pistol. "Drop it," Alara repeated, her voice cold and unforgiving. Fitch, his face pale with fear, obeyed instantly. His pistol clattered to the ground, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. He raised his hands in surrender, his whole body trembling. Alara turned her attention to Ox, who was still standing there, blinking stupidly, his shotgun hanging loosely in his hand. He seemed utterly bewildered by the sudden turn of events, his slow mind unable to comprehend the speed and violence of Alara's actions. "You too, big fella," Alara said, her voice surprisingly gentle, almost pitying. "Drop the shotgun nice and slow." Ox surprisingly obeyed. Perhaps it was the tone of her voice, or perhaps it was the sight of his two companions, one unconscious and the other cowering in fear, that finally penetrated his thick skull. He slowly lowered the shotgun to the ground, his eyes fixed on Alara with a mixture of awe and confusion. Alara surveyed the scene, her gun still held steady, her eyes alert for any sign of further threat. The three bandits, who had moments before been so confident, so menacing, were now neutralized, disarmed, defeated. They had underestimated their opponent, and they had paid the price. She took a deep breath, the adrenaline slowly receding, leaving her feeling strangely empty, strangely sad. She had hoped she would never have to do this again, that she had left this life behind her forever. But the past, it seemed, had other plans. She lowered her gun slightly but didn't holster it. She knew this wasn't over. Razor would regain consciousness eventually, and even Fitch and Ox, despite their cowardice and stupidity, could still pose a threat if given the opportunity. She needed to think, to plan, to figure out what to do next. She couldn't simply let them go, knowing they would likely return or worse, prey on someone else. She couldn't kill them in cold blood either. That wasn't her way, not anymore. She looked at the three men sprawled on the ground before her and felt a surge of, not anger, not hatred, but something closer to disappointment. Disappointment in them for choosing a life of violence and cruelty. Disappointment in herself for being forced to return to that life even for a moment. And then she heard it, a sound from behind her, a soft, almost imperceptible sound, but one that her trained ears picked up instantly. It was the sound of a footstep, a stealthy footstep on the wooden porch of her house. She whirled around, her gun coming up instantly, her eyes scanning the porch, searching for the source of the sound. She saw nothing. The porch was empty, the rocking chair still creaking gently in the breeze. But she knew she wasn't mistaken. Someone was there, someone was watching her, someone who had witnessed the entire confrontation. And then a voice, a soft, feminine voice, spoke from the shadows. "Well, well, Alara," the voice said, "it seems the rumors were true. Whisper has returned." Alara's eyes narrowed. She recognized that voice, though she hadn't heard it in years. It was a voice from her past, a voice she had hoped never to hear again. A voice that belonged to someone who knew her secret, someone who knew who she really was. A figure stepped out of the shadows, a woman tall and slender, with long dark hair and eyes that glittered with an unsettling mixture of amusement and malice. She was dressed in a riding outfit, a leather vest over a white shirt, a gun belt strapped around her waist. She held a rifle in her hands, not pointed at Alara, but held casually as if she were not in the least bit threatened. It was Isabella Izzy Morrow, Alara's former partner, her former friend, her former lover, a woman she had thought she had left behind forever. A woman who was almost as deadly as Whisper herself. The past, it seemed, had not only caught up with Alara, it had brought reinforcements. The arrival of Izzy complicated an already complex situation, creating a new layer of danger and forcing Alara to make difficult and possible deadly decisions. Alara's heart sank, a cold knot of dread forming in her stomach. Of all the people from her past who could have reappeared, Izzy Morrow was among the most complicated, the most dangerous. Their history was a tangled web of shared danger, intense rivalry, grudging respect, and a passionate, ultimately doomed romance. Izzy was as skilled with a gun as Alara and possessed a ruthless cunning that made her a formidable adversary. "Izzy," Alara said, her voice flat, betraying none of the turmoil she felt. Her grip tightened on her peacemaker, but she didn't raise it, not yet. "What are you doing here?" Izzy smiled, a slow, predatory smile that didn't reach her eyes. My, Alara, no warm welcome for an old friend. I'm hurt." She strolled casually onto the porch, her rifle still held loosely in her hand, her eyes taking in the scene before her, the unconscious Razor, the cowering Fitch, the bewildered Ox. "Looks like you've been busy." "I asked you a question, Izzy," Alara repeated, her voice hardening. She needed to know Izzy's intentions, needed to assess the threat level. Was she here for revenge, for money, for something else entirely? Izzy shrugged, a nonchalant gesture that belied the intensity of her gaze. "I heard rumors," she said. "Whispers, you might say, rumors that the legendary Whisper had resurfaced, hiding in some dusty little town playing housewife. I had to see it for myself." "And now you have," Alara said, "so leave, this doesn't concern you." Izzy chuckled, a low, throaty sound that sent a shiver down Alara's spine. "Oh, but I think it does, Alara. You see, I have a proposition for you, a business proposition." Alara narrowed her eyes. "I'm not interested." You haven't even heard it yet, Izzy said, her smile widening. It involves a shipment of gold heading to the bank in Prescott, a very large shipment of gold. Alara's mind raced. Izzy was proposing a robbery, a return to their old life, a life of violence and crime. It was a tempting offer in a twisted way. The adrenaline, the thrill of the chase, the freedom of the open road, it was a siren song that had always called to her even in her quietest moments. But she had made a choice 5 years ago. She had chosen peace, had chosen love, had chosen a different path. She couldn't go back, she wouldn't. No, Alara said firmly, I'm done with that life. Izzy's smile faded. Don't be a fool, Alara, you can't escape who you are. You're Whisper, you're a killer, it's in your blood. I was Whisper, Alara corrected, her voice filled with a quiet sadness, but that's not who I am anymore. Izzy took a step closer, her eyes locking with Alara's. We were good together, Alara, the best. We could be again, richer than we ever dreamed. Alara felt a pang of something. Longing, regret, she quickly suppressed it. That life was gone, buried with Thomas. She wouldn't resurrect it. It's over, Izzy, Alara said. Go, leave me in peace. Izzy stared at her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she nodded. As you wish, Alara, she said softly, but don't think this is the end. The past always catches up, one way or another. She turned to leave, then paused, glancing back at the three unconscious or cowering bandits. What about them? She asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. Going to turn them into the sheriff. Alara hesitated. She hadn't decided what to do with them yet. The local sheriff, a well-meaning but ineffectual man named Bartleby, was hardly equipped to handle criminals like Razor and his gang. Before Alara could answer, a voice spoke from behind her. It was Razor, groaning as he slowly regained consciousness. He sat up, clutching his head, his eyes blurry and unfocused. What happened? He mumbled, his voice thick with pain. He looked around, saw Alara standing over him with her gun, saw Fitch and Ox cowering nearby, and then saw Izzy standing on the porch with her rifle. His eyes widened in recognition. Izzy Morrow, he said, his voice a mixture of surprise and fear. He knew her reputation, knew the stories. Izzy smiled at him, a cold, cruel smile. Hello, Razor, she said. Fancy meeting you here. Razor, suddenly realizing the full extent of his predicament, scrambled to his feet, his hands raised in surrender. Izzy, wait, he stammered. We can work something out. We can split the gold. Izzy cut him off with a sharp laugh. The gold? You think I'm here for the gold? She shook her head. I'm here for something much more valuable, Razor. I'm here for her. She gestured towards Alara. Razor looked from Izzy to Alara, his confusion growing. He didn't understand what was going on. Izzy took a step towards Alara, her rifle still held loosely in her hand. You made your choice, Alara, she said, her voice low and intense. But I haven't made mine. I'm not leaving without you. Alara knew what was coming. She had seen that look in Izzy's eyes before, the look of a woman who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. Izzy, don't, Alara said, her voice pleading. She didn't want to fight her, didn't want to kill her, but she would if she had to. Izzy ignored her. She raised her rifle, aiming it not at Alara but at Razor. Before Alara could react, before she could even shout a warning, Izzy pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the quiet afternoon, a deafening blast that sent birds scattering from the trees. Razor staggered backward, a look of shock and disbelief on his face, a crimson stain blooming on his chest. He crumpled to the ground, dead before he hit the dust. Fitch screamed, a high-pitched, terrified shriek. Ox, his eyes wide with terror, turned and fled, lumbering away as fast as his bulky frame would allow. Alara stared at Izzy, her eyes filled with a mixture of horror and understanding. Izzy had just eliminated the immediate threat, but she had also crossed a line that Alara had hoped she would never have to cross again. Why? Alara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Izzy lowered her rifle, her eyes still fixed on Alara. Because, she said, her voice soft but firm, you're mine, Alara, and I always get what I want. Alara knew this was a lie, a half-truth at best. Izzy had killed Razor not just to protect Alara, but to eliminate the competition, to remove any obstacles to her own desires. But Alara also knew that she couldn't stay in redemption. Izzy's presence, Razor's death, the exposure of her past, it had all shattered the fragile peace she had built. She had to leave, to disappear again, to become Whisper once more, at least for a while. All right, Alara said, her voice resigned. She holstered her peacemaker. Let's go. Izzy smiled, a triumphant smile. She had won, or so she thought. As they rode away from redemption, leaving the dead outlaw and the shattered remnants of Alara's quiet life behind, Alara knew that this was not a return to her old life. It was something new, something different. She was no longer the terrified farm girl seeking revenge. She was no longer the cold-blooded killer known as Whisper. She was something in between, something more. She didn't know where they were going or what the future held. But she knew one thing for sure: she would face it as she always had, with courage, with determination, and with the unwavering will to survive. She would protect the innocent, punish the guilty, and strive to find a balance between the two halves of her soul, the quiet widow and the legendary gunslinger. The sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange, red, and purple. The two women rode in silence, their shadows stretching long and distorted across the vast, unforgiving landscape. The legend of Whisper had been reborn, but this time it was a legend tempered by loss, by love, and by the enduring hope for a future where peace might finally be possible. The quiet widow was gone, the gunslinger was back, but a new, more complex woman rode into the sunset, ready to face whatever destiny had in store for her. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: Alara or Whisper would never be a victim again. She had the power, she had the skills, and most important, she had the will. And the West would remember her name to be both feared and admired, the legend would be told.